The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network. You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
This is Pete Fletzer. On this episode, we're taking a deep dive and discussing the true legacy of the Jedi. Join Andy Lemiere and I as we talk about Luke's sacrifice at the end of Episode 8, the ultimate Jedi lessons, and the role of Rey moving forward. So strap yourselves in, relax, and enjoy this live journey around the galaxy.
Player,
we're having roast.
Why we're here?
Good.
I'm in New Orleans, where it's kind of beautiful, hardest part of Washington.
Well, welcome to episode number 70 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer, and we're a part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network. Welcome to this live special edition. If this is your first visit with Around the Galaxy, well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the ride, and you'll want to come back after this. And if this is a return visit, welcome back, and thank you all so much for being a part of our crew. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at ATGcast, and if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe, like, share, rate, review us, leave some comments, share it on Twitter, tell your friends, buy a billboard, do something, get the word about Around the Galaxy and our friends at the Beyond the Blast Doors network. So whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast outlet like iTunes or Spotify, or if you're watching us right now on YouTube, do what you can. Help us out if you wouldn't mind. One last piece of business before we get started. If you're enjoying the show and you want to support us and the other shows on Beyond the Blast Doors, please consider checking out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Beyond the Blast Doors. Tiers start at just $5 a month, and you're supporting 6 shows. Did I say 6 shows? I did say 6 shows. There are 6 shows. Every Thursday night live, you get Beyond the Blast Doors Live, which is the only weekly Star Wars news show. Friday nights, you get Streaming Star Wars, which is myself and David Amilati talking about all things streaming Star Wars in the Streaming Star Wars Galaxy on Disney+. Wednesdays, you get Postcards from the Galaxy's Edge with the lovely and talented Shannon Moran. Saturdays, you get a new Bombad cast with Jerry and Scotty. And of course, on Mondays, yesterday, you get a new Holochronicles every week with my buddy Andy Lemiere, who you're going to hear from in just a minute, and Josh Most. So enough about that. Let's get to the conversation. What you see here on the screen with me, or if you're listening to the replay, there's a tweet that I put up about a week ago. It was a meme that I found, and for those of you that can't see it, I want to read this meme to you. It says, Luke Skywalker's final act was to halt an army dead in its tracks by using the Force in a way that's ultimately revealed to be pacifist and non-violent. And then it says, that's arguably the most Jedi thing any character has ever done in any of these movies ever, and probably the truest realization of Yoda's teachings we've ever seen. Well, to my surprise, this tweet blew up. It within the first 24 hours, it had almost 1,000 retweets. It had over 4,000 likes. There were 150 comments. Things went nuts. And I was talking to Andy, and Andy and I have done these episodes that we call them Metachlorians, which we sort of take a deep dive into a particular topic and really just have a great conversation that hopefully you'll enjoy. And if you're with us in the comments, please put in your thoughts, because we're going to get to them throughout the entire show. But we talk about a particular issue. We've talked about the role of romance in Star Wars. We talked about the issues that people had with the Rise of Skywalker. And today we're going to talk about Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi and talk about what we think is, if it really is the most Jedi moment ever. And so instead of me rambling on so much, let me bring Andy into the stream with me. Andy, welcome to Around the Galaxy. How you doing, man?
I am well, Pete. This is fun. We haven't done this in a while, but it usually goes pretty well when we do. So I'm glad we're getting a chance to do this again.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have some fun with it. So it was your idea after we were both watching this tweet go crazy, and you said, why don't we talk about this? Because we started sort of texting each other back and forth about having some thoughts on it, and we decided that this would be a fun thing to do. So maybe before we get going, maybe tell us a little bit about what's happening on Holochronicles, and for those that don't know Holochronicles, tell us a little bit about the show.
Josh, my buddy Josh, and I, we talk about all things toy and merchandise relating to Star Wars, and both Josh and I are longtime collectors of a lot of Star Wars related things. This last week we had a former guest of yours, Pete, Marshall Julius on, and he is he's a firecracker. He's kicking the pants. He's just a hilarious, high energy guy who's got an incredible collection himself of all things pop culture. So, and a lot of Star Wars stuff to boot too. So that was a super fun episode. We walked through his collection. He tells us stories about what they are, what they mean to him. And if you're a collector fan, I would encourage you, nay, demand that you go check out that episode.
Yeah, Marshall's one of the few guys that's been on my show twice. I had him one-on-one, and then I had him with Fantatrax with my friend over there. So funny guy, and I checked out some of your episode today, and it was fantastic. So, Andy, let's dig in and start to talk a little bit about. So first of all, this meme took off like crazy, and I do need to make sure it's crystal clear. I did not create this meme. I saw it on Facebook or someplace, and I stole it and threw it up on my Twitter feed, and was shocked to see it blow up like that. But maybe let's start with just sort of talking about go from there. Maybe talk a little bit about the Jedi themselves. I mean, we are saying it is the most Jedi moment.
Right. So what does it mean to have a Jedi moment? I mean, in a technically 11 movies plus animated plus Mandalorian, like, what does it mean to have a Jedi moment, and what is the most Jedi moment? I thought first that The Last Jedi is a pretty polarizing movie amongst the fandom. Yep. And for a lot of different reasons. I think, Pete, you liked the movie more than I did. I had some problems with it, but that's for another time. Right. I thought the movie was okay. I wasn't like pumped about it, but I didn't hate it either. Right. It was just somewhere kind of in the
ringing endorsement, by the way.
Yeah. That's just kind of how I felt, though. It's just like, okay, it's not one that I go back and I watch, but I do feel like enough time has passed since it came out that I can look at it objectively, and I understand some of the critiques on it. It might surprise you what I didn't enjoy about it. Surprisingly, maybe for some of you watching, I didn't actually have a lot of problem with how Luke was portrayed.
Okay. Which seems to be a big problem for most people that have an issue with it. They don't like
right.
it. And I think that's one of the reasons this blew up, because people responded to Luke doing something that
right, or not doing something.
Right.
And so I thought that maybe just to establish what exactly he did or didn't do, we should probably talk about the role of the Jedi, maybe from the inception of the Jedi up to Luke. And originally, and you can look all this stuff up. This is not any of my original thinking here, but the Jedi were a group of people that had a unique connection to what we now know is the Force.
Right.
And the Jedi, and I'm gonna quote this here: the Jedi aspired to attain a state of inner tranquility through calmness and meditation, while avoiding emotions affiliated with the dark side of the Force, such as rage and anger and hatred. The Jedi philosophy did not forbid Jedi from acting in self-defense or in the defense of others. The Jedi were guardians, and here's my Obi-Wan quote here. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the dark times, before the Empire.
Very good. You're almost as good as Mark Thompson. That was very good.
Yes, I'm almost as good as Josh Most. Is it?
There's 3 tiers. There's the Thompson, Most, and then
yeah, just trying to work my way up. So the Sith, who sought power, right, and dominion over the galaxy, the Jedi clashed with them. They've been clashing with the Sith when there were many Jedi and many Sith, and when all the way up to one Jedi and maybe one Sith left. So
right.
but the Jedi carried on as peacekeepers. That was their original intent. They were peacekeepers in the galaxy. They were mediators in conflicts. They did not seek out aggression unless they were defending others in an aggressive. They would aggressively defend others, but they would not seek out an aggressive act. That was not their MO. At least that's what they didn't intend on initially.
Yep.
But over 1,000 years, and when we say 1,000 years, like Yoda was around for 90% of that, which is in some form of being alive. But so he has seen the most. He's been around for it all. He should have the greatest perspective. And yet at the end, or towards the end of Yoda's time, we really see a bastardization of what the Jedi originally intended to be. Instead of being peacekeepers, they were generals of armies. Instead of standing in the gap and defending those who couldn't help themselves, they were trying to beat the opposition to the punch, even though the opposition might have a case to be made. Like, not everything the separatists were about was bad necessarily. Yep. So, but they aligned themselves with the Republic and the galaxy, which they should not have done.
Right.
But once they did that, then they became something other than what they intended. And then at the end, when the Jedi are wiped out or thought to have been wiped out, we're left with just a handful of Jedi left. The Sith are ruling, and then comes Luke. So that takes us up to where Luke is at in this story. And so whatever Luke is, he's a little bit of Obi-Wan, he's a little bit of Yoda, and he's a lot of experiencing things on his own.
I think that's one of the things that's really important about Luke too, is there's a lot of question about, it was interesting to, for those of you, I'll put in the show notes, I'll link directly to the tweet if you want to read the 150, 180 comments, because there's a little bit of everything, right? You do have some of the extreme points of view, but one of the things that people, there was one piece of the argument where people were talking about how, Luke was supposed to bring balance to the Force, but the question, I don't think he was, and it may be a conversation more for another time, but the reality is Luke's role was, I think, slightly misunderstood, not only by Vader and the Empire, but the Emperor, but possibly by us as fans, right?
Well, yeah, the subverting of expectation is always going to be a problem in Star Wars. We expect, and I'm guilty of this. I expected, I knew that by the time The Last Jedi came around, that Luke was pretty crushed about what had happened with him as a teacher teaching the next group of Jedi, and how that was an abysmal failure, right? All of the temple was destroyed. His best friend and sister's son is now pitted against him, and a Sith, a member of the dark side, and it couldn't have gone worse. So he's obviously in a bad place, and understandably so.
Yep.
But when people take issue with how Luke was in The Last Jedi, I kind of go back and forth, because for the most part, The Force Awakens was generally liked because it was almost a spitting image of the original Star Wars.
Yep.
And there was maybe just enough new stuff that was like, okay, all right, that's new and interesting and exciting, but there was a heavy dose of the old stuff too, that I think kind of gathered new and old fans alike. So the critique for The Force Awakens was like, if you were to find one, it was like, well, it's too much like the original. What new stuff did I really get except for a few characters?
Yep.
And so then Rian Johnson does something different. He goes in different directions, which was a critique of the first, of the sequel, and now he actually does it, and then people are upset at that too. So So the expectation for me that Luke, even though he's in a bummer place at the moment, he's at the top. He is now the teacher, and so his Jedi skills should be at peak performance. He should be peak Yoda, peak Obi-Wan, as far as Jedi skills, which to me that means Luke's role was to swing the tide back into the rebellion, was to kick all ass when it comes to the First Order, because he was the apex Force user. Right. And he did not do any of that in the last...
Exactly. Well, and that's, you see here, Matt Harrington says in the chat, the Luke in The Last Jedi wasn't my Luke. He was a bitter old man, totally opposite of the Luke I grew up with. I didn't hate The Last Jedi. Some parts I liked, but it didn't feel like a Star Wars movie to me. And I feel like that's probably sort of the crux of the biggest challenge that people have with the movie. Frankly, I it's a different argument to have, or a different discussion to have as to, and maybe it is part of this, as to what the expectation of Luke should have been for this movie. I mean, at the end of the day, he actually did everything he was expected to do. He faced off against the First Order. He saved his friends. He became legend. He gave hope to the galaxy. And we could wrap the show up right there with that sort of bit. But
thanks for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Check in with us next time. But I think ultimately it comes down to what people's if we can, with this conversation, help or have a different thinking or not. I don't want to change anybody's mind. I never will. I never want to. But the role that Luke played in The Last Jedi was kind of, and this is where we get to the headline of the video, is the most Jedi moment ever. People wanted to see sort of Starkiller from Force Unleashed. They wanted to see him pull stuff out of the sky. They wanted to see amazing things. But he literally stood up as one person against an entire army and saved his friends and gave hope to the galaxy, which is ultimately the most Jedi thing ever. And I think it goes to that pacifist thing. And you and I talked a little bit about that.
Well, one connection that I made here was that, I went into The Last Jedi with an expectation of what I thought Luke should be, and he wasn't any of it.
Yep.
And so while I'm watching it, I'm thinking, oh, well, he's not just gonna, kick some butt in this movie. He's not gonna go Yoda and Count Dooku. We're not gonna see that old fragile, Jedi, wise Jedi, all of a sudden unleash himself. Right. At least in the way that I expected. And the connection that I made is the prophecy of the Messiah. Right. And how a lot of people expected when the Messiah came, for those of a Christian background, you'll have to forgive me this moment here, but Jesus as the Messiah was not the one they expected to behave in that way. Right. They expected the Messiah to come in and overturn the Roman government and save everybody with, a shout and a triumph, trumpets blaring and defeat evil. Well, he came in a completely different way, and it wasn't the way expected. And so Luke, I feel kind of, if we're telling us, finding a parallel here, like you said, Luke still accomplished, he still checked off the boxes at the end of the day, but he did it in a way that was not expected. And that kind of, that took people off guard,
Yep. I think you're, even myself, look, if you go to, PeteFletzer.com, you'll see the blog that I wrote literally a day or two after seeing The Last Jedi. And I would have made some changes. I would have done things a little bit more traditional. I would have had him there in person and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, what he did was what he promised to do, or what he's there to do, which is to provide hope. And in fact, and it's, I've said this before, after seeing Last Jedi, I appreciate a movie like Knives Out a lot more, because I feel like Knives Out, I understand the way Ryan tells a story, and Ryan did the same thing in this story. I mean, he literally told you right up front, this is not going to end the way you think it does. So he set an expectation that nobody wanted to listen to. Secondly, he said, what do you expect me to get out in front of the entire army with a laser sword and take them all on? And he did that too. So it's, and then of course at the very end with Broom Boy telling the story of Luke, which inspires that hope, which is what we got beat over the head with in Rogue One by them saying the word hope about 47 times. We understand that that's what Star Wars is about. And so ultimately, to me, I feel like he got to where we needed to go. And I think the whole challenge of pacifism is something that, people want to see a thrashing Luke Skywalker or a Jedi warrior, right? And Yoda himself said, "Wars don't make one great." And he, we Luke's biggest triumphs. Luke, I think I said this to you last night on the phone. There are 3 battles we see Luke Skywalker fight in his of a major importance. He fights Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back. He fights Vader in Return of the Jedi, and he has the face-off against Kylo in Last Jedi. He loses one. He lost the one in Empire Strikes Back, and he was on the offensive the whole time. In fact, he lights his lightsaber first. He goes on the offensive. He goes after. He breaks sort of the Jedi rule, right? He uses it for attack. The 2 times he wins, he either throws his lightsaber away in Return of the Jedi, or he doesn't fight. He just he causes enough a commotion, enough of a distraction, so that the battle can be won. So,
well, I think this. I guess to then the premise of the show is that was this the most Jedi move that we have seen?
Right.
And so let's just go through maybe a handful of Jedi moments that we have seen on some sort of screen, whether it's movie or small screen here. But I would have to think that a lot of people would consider Anakin's Jedi moment when he tosses Palpatine over that wimpy ass railing that seems to be everywhere in Star Wars movies. But outside of that moment, would you say that Anakin really has a Jedi moment, like maybe in some of the cartoons that really kind of pops out?
I don't think so. I mean, nothing that is so so memorable that you point to it as a Jedi moment. I think being a Jedi feels to me to be a lot about sacrifice and he was a phenomenal warrior, and that it's interesting that Luke says he's looking for a great warrior. He's got this impression that his father was a great warrior, and he's right about that.
Yeah. But as far as Anakin definitely had his own motivations for the things that he did, and I don't think that. Well, they're not. He constantly disobeys Obi-Wan, and even though it gets him out of trouble, a lot of the time, it's not. It's less Jedi and more a guy that has some cool power. Some unique abilities, and so I mean, even throwing the Emperor over the railing, I'm not 100% sure he did that for benevolent reasons towards his son. So I'm going to take Anakin off the table / Darth Vader as far as Jedi moments go. Kanan Jarrus. He's a guy that I have really grown to love in Rebels, and I think, and I watched a few episodes this morning just to kind of get me back in here. That Kanan, that whole last season of Rebels, Kanan earned the title Master.
Yep.
Like, he was a guy that would constantly calm his mind and meditate and think, is there a better way to do this than just head on in, guns blazing. He was constantly trying to find, not that he wasn't afraid to stand, but he also kind of adopted that I'm also in charge of taking care of these people too. So I have to be really deliberate about what I do and why.
Yep.
And I think that season is filled with a lot of Jedi moments, especially the one that he's known for most at the, the episode Jedi Knight.
Yep.
And, of the picture that we see on the screen here. And man, he and Luke, to me, do the best job of representing what the Jedi should be.
Right.
And you can agree with me or disagree with me in the comments there, but But he's an example. When I think of an example of a Jedi, he starts off very much the reluctant master, the reluctant hero, and then he develops into the master, right?
Yep.
He is the one that, I don't know, he's got his stuff together by the end of that show, and as a result, he's taken from us, and so it's like
and so it's interesting, because if we think about that and we choose his Jedi moment, of course it's the most Jedi moment when he sacrifices himself by holding the fire back to let his crew get out. The question is, so I think, well, we'll get into it in a couple minutes, but what is it that makes it a Jedi moment? Is it self-sacrifice or not?
Well, I think a lot of people would probably associate a self-sacrificial act as being Jedi, or being able to put your someone else's life ahead of yours. Is very, very Jedi, absolutely. But it doesn't have to. And here's talking about Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan, at the hand of his greatest failure, did something very Jedi to me.
Yep.
He sacrificed himself, but not in a life or death way. He sacrificed the last 20 years of his life to look out for baby Luke. He did a very Jedi thing. It's like, and I think Yoda says this so perfectly, Jedis are about facing their fears and overcoming failures and passing on what they learned. Yep. Obi-Wan had a big failure named Anakin Skywalker. Yep. And he goes off, and some say he goes off in exile, some say he goes off for his last mission, some say he goes off to begin his redemption. And they're all three the same at once, and so he sacrifices himself for the hope in Luke.
Yep.
And that is, to me, is a very Jedi thing to do. But then when he finally does have that meeting with Luke, what does he do? He's only around Luke, as far as we know, as he's only around Luke in a mentorship role for what, maybe a week?
Right.
Maybe a handful of days.
Yep.
But Luke is very impressed by who Obi-Wan is, that he's a Jedi, that he knew his father, that he has something that he can relate to, that he couldn't with his uncle or his aunt.
Yep.
And in that time that he spends with Luke, barely doing anything except glean from him as much knowledge and wisdom as he can, and maybe that you can defeat a training droid with the blast shield on, but here was this connection. I told you earlier, I made a connection today that I hadn't really thought about before. Maybe you haven't either, but this got me a little bit excited. Jedi sacrifice themselves for the big picture, right? For other people, for the idea of hope. And Obi-Wan, at the very end of Star Wars, faced his failure. Yep. Faced his his biggest regret, and as it turned out, one of his closest friends and allies, and sacrificed himself as a distraction while the hope could escape out the side.
Right.
And who was there to see that? Luke frickin' Skywalker.
Right.
So his very first mentor,
yep,
knew going in that he wasn't coming out of this.
Yep.
Knew that he was going to face his fear, his biggest regret, and not walk away from it.
Yep.
For the sake of hope.
Yep.
For the sake of the rebellion, and cause himself to be a distraction while they escaped.
Yep.
And in The Last Jedi, what did Luke do?
Oh, 100%. Exactly. And actually, and that's one of those things that I wrote in my what I would have done different is I would have had him mirror that almost to a T. And I'm kind of glad he didn't, because everybody said that The Force Awakens was so much A New Hope. It would have been almost too much. But, it's interesting you say that, because I now, if you go and you watch A New Hope, and I love this now, because I actually feel like it's the best acting ever that was never planned. And that is when Alec Guinness is there, when he finds Luke in the desert, and Luke says he wants to know if you know Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he says, Obi-Wan, this name I haven't heard in a long time. And if you watch not Ewan McGregor, but if you watch Alec Guinness, his face, you see he knows something's about to happen. Like, if you now know what we now know, you know that he knows that this is that moment that he's been put there for, right? He was there, he inherited this burden of training Vader and failing, and goes to the desert knowing that he has to wait for the new hope, which is Luke, to be prepared and ready to start his journey. And when Luke says Obi-Wan, he knows that the first domino has fallen. And if you watch that scene again, go home, when you're done, go watch that. Just watch that one bit. It, like, you get chills when you see it now, because you know what he's been through, and just that he knows that this is about to happen. And if you think from a certain point of view, the short story in the the Master and Apprentice story, from a certain point of view, he knows he's out there prepping, and so this is it. And Alec Guinness delivers something that nobody knew was going to happen.
No.
Not even George knew that was going to happen, but he knew that this moment was the beginning of the end. And so I think that's what's so great about that story, and that moment when Obi-Wan holds up his, and today I watched just the scene where he gives himself up, and he looks over at Luke and he gives this little smile, like he knows, all right, this is what my role is. This is my job.
Yeah. And I have to think that Rian Johnson looked at that and like, well, what would Luke do in this situation? Well, he would do what he was trained or taught or was an example to, from the beginning. Luke didn't have Jedi to talk with. He didn't have a council. He didn't have, and so the moments that he had with Obi-Wan, the moments that he had with Yoda, really had to impress upon him how he was going to be as a Jedi and what being a Jedi meant. And so at the end of The Last Jedi, when Hope seems in a very precarious position, he faces his biggest regret, his fear in that he has lost his nephew, the son of his best friend, the son of his sister. He faces that and accepts. He accepts, maybe for the first time in years, since he had kind of gone away to the island, that okay, I played a role in this and it didn't work out how I thought, but it's not wholly my fault, but here's what I'm going to do to try and rectify the situation. I'm going to walk into this knowing that I'm not going to walk away from it, so that Hope can leave out the back door, and maybe there still will be a chance for my nephew, like there was still a chance for Vader.
Yep. It's such a mirror of what Obi-Wan did, and for the same exact reason. And is, in a way, Obi-Wan may not have wanted or looked forward toward a rebirth of the Jedi, and whether because that's one of the things that Luke says to Kylo in this scene that has led to this conversation is, he's not the last Jedi. The Jedi will continue, and he gives that sacrifice for that. And so it's so much more powerful when you look at it in direct correlation to Obi-Wan. And that's why all the Star Wars stories really kind of work, because, geez, to quote George, the overused quote, it's poetry, it rhymes, but all that stuff does come together over and over again.
Yeah. And so then who was witness to that? Rey.
That was, yep.
Rey was witness to that. And so Luke faced his fears. He he sacrificed himself. He passed on what he had learned. He allowed the Jedi to continue, just not in the way we thought it would happen. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. Like, that's why I didn't really have much issue with how Luke was. It wasn't how I thought it would go. It wasn't probably the way, if I were in charge, would have done it. Yep. But you can't really say that it doesn't make sense. I think we can take that argument off, even if you didn't like it. You can't really say that, well, that was out of nowhere. Well, it wasn't. And so to the meme, I guess I would say, was it the most Jedi moment ever? I'd say, no, we've actually seen this move before. Right. And it makes sense that that's what he did. So, and so now Rey, you want to talk about Rey for a sec?
Sure.
So Rey, having witnessed this, Rey's role in The Last Jedi was to get Luke off the island, right? Mm-hmm. Luke had quarantined himself. He had he was dealing with very real thoughts of he had totally let down his last remaining family. He had failed in his Jedi temple, that and people had died as a result, people that he cared about. He thought he had lost his nephew. So he had put himself on an island, and islands in storytelling are always places people go to, to escape, whether for fun or for hiding. Islands are where people go. And as soon as people get on islands in storytelling, the object is to get off the island. And how do they get off the island? And that's another story or another adventure, and how that happens. And you can look, that's not a unique thing to Star Wars. This is, kind of basic storytelling. If there's an island, people get there, that's the first part, and then the second part is how do they get off the island. Right, yep. So Rey's job was to get Luke off the island, and eventually did do that. He got, he taught, he passed on, even though he was trying to discourage her initially. This is why the Jedi must die, and he was going to teach her, and it's just, that's, I don't know, I connect with being a parent in that regard. Your kids are going to learn from you no matter what you do. They're going to learn either that's the way you should do it, or they're going to learn that's the way you shouldn't do it. Right. And so Rey was learning from Luke, what she should do, what she shouldn't do, and then now took that and became the next Last Jedi, and who knows, and so she was witness to Luke's version of what a Jedi meant, and or what he was intending to be, and how he wasn't perfect, and how he was battling through some inner stuff, just like everybody else. He was not unique. He wasn't the only one that had failed miserably as a Jedi. Right. And so she got to learn firsthand with Luke for only about a week, for about the same amount of time Luke was around Obi-Wan. Yep.
And Yoda, right? So Yoda's role as well, right? None of these guys have spent much time with their potential mentor. Yeah.
And though she had some books, and though she was mentored, we find out later she was mentored by Leia for the longest amount of time that really we've seen any Jedi outside of Obi-Wan and Anakin. Right. She was able to glean a lot from Leia too, but Leia's version of being a Jedi is a bit non-traditional as well.
Sure. Yep.
She was coming at it from a senatorial background, from a stand in front of people as the leader, and she had to be aggressive in some situations and pull back in others, and yet still try to hold some of the tenets of what being a Jedi was as well. And so it must have been a kind of a precarious position for Leia. It's hard to be a teacher of Jedi things when your role is not a Jedi. Right. So I imagine that would be tough for Leia.
Yeah, and I think, from a storytelling perspective, that opens up some really interesting potential for, episode 10, 11, and 12, should they ever go down that road, because she didn't learn from a master. She didn't really learn much from Luke other than what she saw, and you could say that Luke gave her lessons by not teaching her, right? The way he kind of made her learn it on her own. But she would have to discover it and sort of start fresh, because Leia would, how much did we don't know how much Leia learned.
No.
And so we don't know what she was able to pass on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and as a result, that's Mark. We don't know what Leia gleaned from the books or from Luke, and we don't know what she was able to pass on, although we know that there was some sort of cultivating, going on. And to go back to the original idea of the Jedi, they sought peace and tranquility through meditation, and they were not the first ones in a fight. They were the mediators. They were trying to find peaceful resolutions to conflict, but would stand in defense of others when needed. And there was Ion Cannon there said, would Andy say Rey going to Exegol fits that model again? Was she trying to distract for the fleet's action? Was she trying to find her own path to victory? There was definitely an element, although she was kind of going on her own. I think maybe two things can be true at once. She was, in a way, a distraction. She became the main focus, because, once again, the Emperor and the Sith underestimate the faith in the friends. That line that he says in Return of the Jedi.
Yep. Your
weaknesses, your faith in your friends. So they don't really give the fleet much, because they have this enormous fleet with planet-destroying weapons on it, and this very unimpressive fleet comes in. Well, the focus is going to be on Rey. She's creates a dyad in the Force with Kylo Ren, with Ben Solo. So yeah, she's going to be the focus. So the attention will be on her, while this is going on over here. Who kind of cares? And we might even lose a couple of Star Destroyers, but that is nothing, in comparison. All the while, trying to buy some time while Lando and the rest of the crew actually gets there, and the real dogfight in space actually happens.
So let's pursue though that Exegol thought, because it's something that when you start to think about the entire Skywalker saga, and at the end of the Rise of Skywalker, the only living Skywalker gave the ultimate sacrifice once again to similar to, we were saying before, as Luke did in Last Jedi, to give hope and give a chance for the Jedi to return. Would you call what Kylo did a Jedi type sacrifice?
Well, there's a bit of that where, okay, so here's my pushback against Luke being the best example of a Jedi. The two examples that we see him being selfless, when he tosses his lightsaber in front of the Emperor and says, "You failed. I won't strike him down." Well, he did that because Luke has a dad-sized hole in his heart, right? His goal is not to kill anybody; it's to save his dad, he can sense the conflict in him and the good in him, and it's raging, and so he's going to do everything to try and save his dad, and that would also help the rebellion, right? But the dad was the priority. He didn't battle Kylo Ren with the intent on killing him, because he has hope that even though he failed him as a master, that the story on Ben Solo isn't done.
Right.
Part of that hope leaving out the back door was that maybe Leia or Rey can bring around Ben.
Yeah.
And so his 2 acts of selflessness in the face of the Sith were for his dad and for his nephew. And so you could say, well, of course, he's going to do that for his family. Well, would he have done that for Finn? Would he have done that for Poe? He would have done it for Leia. Sure. He would have done it for Han. He would have done it for Chewie. Right. But those are established relationships that he has. Right. Or even though his dad wasn't an established relationship, it was at least one that he was trying to reclaim in his life, even if for a moment. So, so that's my pushback. If I were to say, well, let's hold on here. Let's pump the brakes on Luke being the most benevolent person in the world and having these ideals for all. He did them for his family. Right. So I know that's kind of a weak argument because we don't know what we don't know, except that it was an example that he did, only in front of Vader and Palpatine the first time, and now in front of what was left of the rebellion, so that the rumors and the mystique of Luke Skywalker then just explode and what he did.
So this is why I would say, this is where I would give it a little bit of weight for being the most Jedi move ever. If the Jedi are the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, right? The protectors of all things good, I suppose, in the galaxy, right?
Sure. Fairness,
good.
Equality, yeah.
Sure, right. But the primary thing, the every other sacrifice that we've now spoken about, other than Luke's in The Last Jedi, has been very personal, right? You could even say everything that and this is Anakin's problem from day one, is everything Anakin has done is to get back to his mother, to save his wife, and then to save his son, right? So very selfish reasons. And you could even say we don't know why Kylo sacrificed himself for Rey, because the story just didn't give us all the answers. Conversation that we had a couple months ago. Right? If you want to hear that story, you can find it on Around the Galaxy episode something or other. But that conversation was very different. But the only sacrifice that we saw any Jedi make that I can think of that was for bigger than self was Luke at that moment, because not only did it give the Resistance a chance to escape, it gave hope to the galaxy, it gave an opportunity for Rey to survive, to continue on whatever the Jedi 2.0 looks like, and it was also to possibly save and salvage Kylo, which ideally would have also then reduced the power of the First Order. So it was the biggest sacrifice, and it was done in a pacifist way. He didn't injure a single person other than himself.
Just and a lot of Kylo's ego.
Right, a lot of it. Yeah. And just some of the I honestly, it's one of those things where when I saw Last Jedi, I thought some of the lines were a little cheesy at the end, and now when I watch them, I love them even more, just because I feel like the connections were so strong. He did such a nice job with that.
And so to get back to Rey, then Rey is definitely aggressive. She wants to try and save Ben, but she's not afraid of him either. And we get that right from the get-go in The Force Awakens. She will aggressively pursue something, but she also hasn't been really trained either. These are more natural instinct that she's building on.
Right.
And even in the battle on Death Star 2, on the remains there, she is going after him. It's not defense. She is going at him because she killed Han, Ben killed Han, and that was, and even though they allied for a minute in The Last Jedi, they were not allies yet.
Right.
And she even stabbed him with the saber in the same, in almost exactly the same place where he got Han.
Yep.
And the difference is she used her aggression to get Kylo in a place to look me in the eye, listen to what I have to say. I will kill you if I have to, just to get your attention. And then she healed him, right? Yep. So she gave him 2 wounds, but then actually healed them both in the face scar and on the side.
Yep.
She healed him. She used her ability, her power, and I like what was said here, to finish what he started. And then Kylo at the end of the Last Jedi, whether it was for platonic or romantic, or he saw that Rey saw the bigger picture better than he was able to, and then gave that back. And that was the best way he could serve the greater good, was by letting Rey live. Yep. And so that, I do think, was a Jedi moment for Ben, whatever the motivation behind it was. But I think he saw that moving forward, what was best was if Rey moved on, if Rey survived. And so he did that in a sacrificial way, in a Jedi-like way, for Rey.
Yep, very true. So, I guess as we come near the end of the conversation, we've kind of gone back and forth as to whether or not that was the most Jedi moment. What are there any moments, if you were to pick one, which one would it be? Where would we come down on this? That may not be a fair question, because
Well, let's ask the chat first. Were there any Jedi moments that maybe we haven't hit on that maybe you guys can come up with real quick? I think a lot, even though he wasn't a Jedi, I think a lot of what Chirrut Imwe stood for and what he preached about, I think he was very Jedi-like.
Yep.
I think Han's moment on the walkway with Kylo was a Jedi-type moment, knowing that it probably wasn't going to end well, but he had to try. So I mean, for me, I have to say the best example of a Jedi moment, I think, for me, and it's impossible to think about how Obi-Wan as an actual person could do this, but Obi-Wan's life, like, for me, he's the penultimate Jedi. He wasn't like, he was good at a lot of things. He wasn't the best at maybe anything, but what he did do was that he lived a life of service for something greater. And there were devastating moments for Obi-Wan along the way, and he lived his life so that others could reap the benefits.
Yep.
And I can't think of anything more Jedi than Obi-Wan as just a person in general, and not necessarily his decision to be a distant observer on Tatooine for 20 years. That in itself would be incredibly difficult, or to sacrifice himself so Luke could move on and be the hope for the Jedi in the future. I mean, I don't know, Obi-Wan is it for me.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that, especially based on all the points that we laid out here. You could, I mean, if we start from the point of the meme which started the conversation, yes, that was the ultimate sacrifice. But we don't know enough about, other than the Legends story about Luke Skywalker that came out before Last Jedi, but we don't know what he went through, and his was a self-inflicted exile. For a while, I was of the argument that, yeah, that's what Jedi do. They put themselves into self-inflicted exile. Yoda did it. Obi-Wan did it. But now that you know the entire story, you know that Obi-Wan did it out of service. We don't know if he felt guilt, if he felt a value or something he needed to do to finish that up. But we've seen Obi-Wan lose everything. He lost his master, he lost his student, he lost his best friend, he lost the only woman he ever loved, he lost the
Jedi. He lost the Jedi.
Right. He lost 20 years of his life, right? Literally sitting in the desert, waiting. So I would say that after this conversation, I would say that the most Jedi moment ever is Obi-Wan sacrificing himself to Darth Vader so that Luke can escape, because that also gave hope to the galaxy. Luke doesn't escape, then Leia doesn't get the plans back to the rebellion, Luke doesn't blow up the Death Star, and the rebels are defeated, right? So I might go that route, that Obi-Wan had the most Jedi thing ever, the most Jedi moment ever.
Yeah, and Luke mirrored it in The Last Jedi almost exactly.
Right. Yep.
So it wasn't the hero we wanted, it was the hero we needed.
Right. At 100%. And I think that's one of those things that that's what makes Star Wars so cool. So, well, Andy, any last thoughts on this topic? I'm sure we could probably go on for days about it, but any last parting thoughts on it?
No, I think my, just to kind of put a button on it here, I think my critiques of The Last Jedi are still my critiques, but how Luke was portrayed, though it wasn't what I expected, it was correct. It was Jedi-like, and I think, for whatever things I enjoyed or didn't enjoy about the movie, I do think Rian Johnson did Luke in a way that made sense to who Luke was and what he saw as an example of what the Jedi were. The three pillars of a Jedi's strength are knowledge, the Force, and self-discipline. And he passed those things on. By example, by trying to discourage Rey, he, in his own way, he did everything that he was supposed to do, so that hope could live on, so that evil could be defeated, so that he could pass on what he was supposed to learn, from Master Yoda on down. And he did everything that he was supposed to do. And the more I get away from my initial feelings about it, and the more I can just kind of sit and be meta, think about my thinking, it makes a lot more sense, and I am okay with it.
Yeah. Yep. No, it's and I think that's one of the things, and maybe that's maybe our next episode, because I would love to dig into what we spent some time talking about the Rise of Skywalker and where it disappointed and where people looked at it differently, and where the things that really worked for it, and maybe it'd be worth having a conversation about what worked, maybe a broader conversation about the sequel trilogy, because I think there's a lot of strings that are still out there, and there's a lot of people that do get upset about a meme like the one that I posted that causes 4,000 people to like it and 1,000 people to retweet it because they're passionate about it, one way or another. So I think the conversation is definitely worth pursuing. Listen, before I forget, I want everybody to, if you're listening to the show or you're watching it, share this episode on Twitter with the hashtag #MostJediEver. That's hashtag #MostJediEver, and we will we'll give away. Did we decide which Funko Pop we're going to give away, Andy? I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Leave it to me then.
We will leave it to Andy, but we are going to give that away. So if you're listening or watching, we will pull that, let's say Friday. So share this as much as you can over the next couple days, and with the hashtag #MostJediEver, and we will pull a winner. Andy, thank you so much. This was a blast. It's always fun to spend an hour on these kind of things, because we see these conversations happening all the time in social, and things go back and forth, and sometimes they get a little ugly, and sometimes it's hard to actually have the conversation about it. But I've loved watching some of the things we saw down the side. If you watch the video replay of this, you'll see we posted some up as they came through, some really great comments and thoughts. Let's continue the conversation on Twitter, and make sure to, like I said, share it with hashtag #MostJediEver, and perhaps you will win a Funko Pop. Andy, thank you so much, man. We will do this again soon.
Yeah, these hour-long, this is so much better than a Twitter discussion, right?
Absolutely.
140 characters to really tell you how I feel. Like, no, I can't do that. And I need to process. I need to sit and think and chew about things. And this, I always learn something, and it in a small way, it makes me grow. Having these conversations with you, seeing the comments, and it's okay to have your thinking challenged, and maybe come away with a perspective that maybe you don't agree with, but at least you can understand why they might think that way. And there's not enough of that in the world right now. So I'm glad in our own small little way, we don't have to agree on everything, but at least we can come to an understanding. And it's something about Star Wars. Who cares? It's Star Wars, right? It's Star Wars. Right. Who cares?
We're having fun.
But maybe we can be an example, So that's what I pull away from this every time. It's like I'm glad we can talk and think and share and maybe disagree, maybe agree, but we can understand.
Well, it's just, I think it's just proof that it's something that we love, that we're passionate about, and it's something we want to have a conversation over. And I think, if you apply the way conversations like these go to Twitter, and as soon as you see somebody, this conversation would suck if I was telling you were wrong and you were stupid for thinking the way you are. But instead, we had a conversation about it, and we talked. Like I said, I walked away when I came in. This was the most Jedi moment ever. By the time we left and had this conversation, that Obi-Wan moment is what it is for me. And maybe I'll have to make an original meme and put that out there so people can respond to that as well.
It's okay. It can still be your most Jedi moment. That's fine. It's okay to have differing opinions. It's okay to agree. We're just doing it in a fun way. So
absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Pete.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again soon.